Yesterday we were talking about Apemen. Today we're going to look at a presentation from Mike Riddle of Answers in Genesis with facts about Apemen. So follow along as we proceed here, as we look at possible ancestors. The history of Apemen, the track record, is this, that you don't need your notes or anything. You don't have to write anything down. This is just a bonus learning time. The track record is that as evolutionists have continued to try to find evidences of ape men, that is, transitional forms between apes and humans, that they have struck out over and over again, despite their best efforts. And we're going to look at two case studies: the Neanderthals, which is what we were looking at yesterday. Remember, I read you an excerpt from a book about the Neanderthals. And what was the conclusion? What did we find that they said about Neanderthals? We didn't talk about that yesterday? Are you guys behind the other class, maybe? Okay. Maybe we didn't in the other class either, and they just didn't remember. So I don't see it on my slides here for yesterday either. I know. Oh, here it is. It's hidden behind another slide. We didn't look at this yesterday?
No.
Okay. Well, here's a book called The Neanderthals Necklace, in search of the first thinkers, looking for, the ancestor of humans. A provocative, emotional journey into the world of the Neanderthals. Dun, dun, dun. It's exciting, isn't it? Okay, here's an excerpt from the book. The Neanderthals were not intellectually like our 2.5-year-olds. Actually, their physiological development was very similar to ours. So intellectually, they were not as advanced as our 2.5-year-olds. What's the matter?
It's funny that they think they were so smart, yet they were.
Yeah. Well, and that's this. We're going to see what they actually say about it. Is that they're not even up to a 2.5-year-old. But look, physiologically, it was very similar to ours. They say their maturity of birth was similar to that of a modern child. Like us, they were born much less developed than our chimpanzees. By the age of 2.5, they had gone through essentially the same developmental stages leading to adulthood that we have. And they continued growing and learning from adults throughout childhood, just like we do. As adults, they acted consciously and purposefully when they manufactured stone tools, built fires, and buried their dead. So, according to this, what does a Neanderthal seem like? Just like us. They keep saying it over again. They were just like us, just like us, just like us. But then they want to say that they only had the mental capacity of a 2.5-year-old. Based on what? Because they have to have an ape-like ancestor. They have to find one, whether it exists or not. So the objective scientific evidence is they're just like us, but they want to consider them to be somehow ape-like. And so here's some of the drawings that have been proposed in the past. This comes right from a book called The Development of Man that I took a picture of. These are key figures in the story of ancestors. So here's proconsul had ape-like teeth and arms, and the body and face and hands of a monkey, ran on all fours, but probably stood erect for short periods. And then here's Australopithecus. You see the years they've got here. Ape-like face, but a larger jaw, higher brow than apes, possessed man-like limbs, probably walked semi-erect. And then Pithecanthropus had man-like but oversized teeth, a higher brow, and a larger brain than the early hominids. His posture was erect. Now, what is it that leads them to believe that these different skeletons, or skeletal remains at most, resemble these figures? Their imagination. There's no indication in the skeletal remains that they look like these things at all, or stood like these, or ran like this, or anything. It's all in their minds. So we're going to look at some of the facts about some of these so-called ancestors. Yes?
Do evolutionists believe that we are still evolving?
That's a good question. Some of them, because it seems obvious that we're not. You know, if we look all through human history, and you can see that man hasn't really changed. That's not coming off. Somehow I go back to the other one. I didn't know I could do that. Accidentally, I discovered a way to go from one slideshow to another. And it's obvious we haven't been evolving. And so what they say is, well, we've stopped evolving physically. Now we need to evolve intellectually. And so that's what we're working on. Of course, if you look at some sci-fi movies and things like that that are supposedly, millions of years in the future, we have huge heads with big brains, and we can communicate telepathically and all that. So it depends on whether imagination is geared toward the future or whether they're looking at now. But they obviously don't see any evolution occurring now. So they can't really say that we are evolving. But I think there is an underlying premise that intellectually, at least, we've been evolving. Hence the Neanderthal, he only had the capacity to be 2.5-year-old. How do they know that? Well, they're just guessing at that. And so the idea is that throughout history, mankind has become smarter and smarter. And I think that affects some of what they even think about things that happened historically. And yet at the same time, we can't explain how they built the pyramids. We can't explain a lot of the ancient structures. I would say instead of evolution happening, if anything, intellectually, it's been devolution. We've been devolving. Yes?
What about animals then, like monkeys and chimpanzees? Do they think they're also evolving?
See, they have to think that they are, and yet there's no evidence that anything is. And so they're stuck. So they have to look at the past and try to find something there in the fossil record to substantiate their ideas.
So what's the argument then for the animals now?
Well, we all came from one ancestor. Those came from ancestors back a ways, and we're just at the point where things have evolved to this point, but nothing's evolving right now. Oh, but they'll pull some trickery in order to try to substantiate their ideas. And it's this. Are you familiar with the terms microevolution and macroevolution? Okay, we'll get into that. They use examples of adaptation. Dogs through breeding become another kind of dog. Moths that have a certain color, the colors change because of the environment. Things that happen because of environment where animals adapt. They take those examples and say, see, there's an example of evolution happening. But it's not evolution. It's not one thing turning into another. It's nothing acquiring a characteristic. It's simply using the engineering that God placed in every being's DNA to adapt to the environment. So that the finches that Darwin famously saw on the Galapagos Islands, who were different than the finches in South America, and he postulated that because they were on this island, they had evolved because they had a different kind of beak. Well, that was simply an adaptation. That was not even evolution. And in fact, after he left the Galapagos Islands, they went through kind of a drought or something where the finches' beaks on that island changed back to the way it was where they came from, because they adapted because of the different environment. But if you watch nature shows, they will over and over again point out minor adaptations within an animal species and say, see, there's evolution. And they're either lying or they're ignorant. And I can't think they're ignorant. They know the difference. So they're out lying about what they are presenting.
How long do they think that humans took to evolve?
Hundreds of thousands of years. It depends on where you put the starting point, or how far back you go. All right, so we'll see here what they have to say about some of these different ancestors, supposedly. Okay, so here's a couple of case studies we're going to look at. We're going to see how evolution hinders critical thinking, and it looks like this is not keyed in. And we're going to see how things change. Okay, quickly. Evolution begins with the assumption man has evolved from ape-like creatures. Pick your relative. Which one are you related to? But we know that God created man in his own image, which is what the Bible teaches, and that's what's true scientifically as well. All right, in school textbooks, this is in a school textbook, biology book. Look closely at your hand. It says you have 5 flexible fingers. Animals with 5 flexible fingers are called primates. Monkeys, apes, and humans are examples of primates. Primates are most likely evolved from small insect-eating, rodent-like mammals that lived about 60 million years ago. So your most immediate ancestor, at least 60 million years ago, was a rodent, a rat. And somehow a rat evolved fingers and toes and hands and stuff. Yeah.
Are Christian students in schools allowed to argue this point in class?
It depends on the teacher. Many times not. There are some teachers that will allow, some teachers that are Christians that try to present evidence like, against this. But in some schools they're allowed to, some schools they're told they're not allowed to, and they'll be fired if they do. And some have been fired for presenting the other side, even in college level. There was a professor, probably been 20 years ago now, who was a professor at Bowling Green State University. In one of the science departments, he was named Teacher of the Year. The next year he was fired because he mentioned creation. Here's another biology book. All researchers agree on certain basic facts. We know, for example, that humans evolved from ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. Even the chimp knows that's not true. Piltdown man was supposedly one of our ancestors. Here's the segment of the lower ape-like jaw that was found. And here's a segment of a human skull that was found. The New York Times, which never tells a lie, said, Darwin theory proved true. It was featured in textbooks and encyclopedias. In 1953, scientists studied the bones. The truth is that it was a fraud. These bones are only 600 years old. But you can bet in 1954 they didn't take it out of the textbooks and encyclopedias. It was still there. And for probably into the 60s. 1922, Nebraska man was supposed to be our ancestor. It was used to support evolution in the 1925 Scopes trial, called the Scopes monkey trial. Took place in Dayton, Tennessee. A very important event in our history. The claim is it was 1 million years old and an intermediate length between apes and humans. The truth is, it was an extinct pig's tooth. From that tooth, they built a whole model of what this ape-like creature looked like. And it turned out it wasn't even a human tooth. Ramapithecus in the 1930s. Here's what they found. Here's what they drew. What is it that enables them to take this and draw this?
Imagination.
A very vivid imagination. Exactly. Time magazine said it's ideally structured to be an ancestor of hominids. If he isn't, we don't have anything else that is. And that's the problem. They don't have anything. They're putting all their eggs in the basket of Ramapithecus. This must be our missing link. This must be our ancestor because he's all we've got. Truth is that in 1970, a baboon living in Ethiopia was discovered with the same dental structure. Similar morphological features are found on Ramapithecus, and Ramapithecus was dropped from the human line. They finally admitted it can't be a human.
And nothing else then. So then
They got nothing else, but they got to keep looking. And so we've had Piltdown man was a hoax, Nebraska man was a pig tooth, Ramapithecus was an ape, and there are a lot of other ones too. There's Peking man, there's all kinds of different ones that we could talk about here. But what about the dates they come up with? In each case, the date was completely wrong. 2 case studies, Neanderthals and Lucy. How many of you heard of Lucy? Here's the original drawing of Neanderthal that we just read about in that other textbook. He was first found near Dusseldorf, Germany in 1856. Constructed to look ape-like, as in that drawing. Had a brain capacity about 200 cc's larger. The initial construction was discovered to be wrong. It really looked like this. But this communicates an ancestor, ape-like ancestor. This does not. It was found out that the Neanderthals used jewelry, used musical instruments, did cave paintings, were capable of speech, and buried their dead. Doesn't sound like an ape. Most anthropologists recognize burial as a very human, very religious act. But the strongest evidence that Neanderthals were fully human and of our species is that at 4 sites, Neanderthals and modern humans were buried together. What they found out is that the reason why the skeletons of the Neanderthals seem to be hunched over, and so they thought they were sort of ape-like. They must be ape-like if they're hunched over, walking like this. It must be an ape. Well, it turns out that when they examined the bones, they found out that the so-called Neanderthals had arthritis. They were humans with arthritis. Here's the drawing of a Neanderthal fossil. Here's the drawing that you can get it in the Museum of Berlin. Looks kind of like an ape. But look, the jaw is 30 millimeters away from the socket. Your jaw can't work if it's not in the socket. And when they drew this, they either, again, were ignorant that your jaw needs to connect to your socket, or they were intentionally deceiving. Here's what it's supposed to be. Now notice when you put the jaw in the socket, the face looks more flat like a human and not jutting out like an ape. So the anatomy of Neanderthal, a thick brow, stocky build, short extremities. Common dates are given. They say that the Neanderthals existed for about 100,000 years. But if you chart that out into 100 generations, that means there should have been over 50 billion Neanderthals. Where are they? Where are the fossils of 50 billion of these people? You know, so obviously their numbers are way off. 1964, they said Neanderthals are a subspecies of human. 97, they said they're a separate species. But, and that's a result of DNA research, but the results of the mitochondrial DNA show clearly that Neanderthal is not our direct ancestor, unlike earlier hypotheses made by some paleontologists. So saying, well, the DNA is different enough that they must not have been a human. Okay? Well, how did they get this? Well, they compared 1,669 humans with one Neanderthal. When you're only comparing to one, that's not a good scientific basis anyway. But they found that between modern humans, the range is 1 to 24. When compared to modern humans, there were 22 differences. Between modern humans, the range is 1 to 24 differences. So the differences between Neanderthals and humans was 22, but between many different humans, it's came up to 24. So it falls within the range of humans. So what does this mean? There are a few modern humans who differ by 2 substitutions more than the Neanderthal individual. Using evolutionist logic, these people are separate species. 8% of you apparently are not human because you have more differences than the Neanderthals do. Now, I won't make a guess as to which of the people here are not human. I see people pointing fingers. You don't know without looking at the DNA. But see how silly they are and how driven they are to find some explanation. Neanderthal has a protruding brow ridge, stocky build, isolated. It was an isolated population of people, lived in a cold, harsh climate, but they're 100% human. Here's a reconstruction from a skull found in France. He looks human. Okay, now Lucy. Lucy was some skeletal remains that was found in Africa. They're looking. These guys are looking for something. They're looking for some missing link, some way to show an evolution took place. And every time they find something, it turns out to be either false or a hoax or something that doesn't compute. So that book said, you know, we find our ancestor. Our oldest human ancestor was discovered. They call her Lucy. Look at the conception here. Well, you know, what do you notice about this just real quickly?
Tools.
Okay, it's got tools. Maybe you might say ape-like tools. What else?
Walking upright.
Walking, standing pretty straight, right? What about the head?
And the jaws that connect to the socket.
Yeah, it's hard to tell without seeing the skeleton, but does it look ape-like?
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, you've got an ape-like head. Does this look ape-like? Looks like a human, doesn't it? And they say it has a contemplative gaze. That means he's thinking. The artist said this: I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate something about where he was headed. Not that he could contemplate himself, but I wanted to show that in the future, millions of years in the future, he would be a human and he would be thinking. That's what he was trying to communicate. Lucy discovered in '74. About 40% of the fossil was found. It was claimed to be 3.5 million years old. It was claimed to walk upright. Now, one of the problems it doesn't address on the slideshow is that, and I can't remember which part of it, I think it was the lower skeletal remains, actually weren't with the rest of it. They found it about a mile away at a different level. So it probably doesn't even belong here. But this is the artist's conception. Notice here the feet. What kind of feet are they? I don't know if you can see there.
Regular feet.
Yeah, they look like human feet, don't they? But the rest of it looks like kind of an ape that's walking upright. There's no similarity in appearance to humans. The long arms are like chimpanzees. The jaws are like chimpanzees. Upper leg bone is like chimpanzees. The legs are very ape-like. Are you getting You get an idea here? The brain size was within the range of chimpanzees. Large back muscles for tree dwelling. The hands are similar to the pygmy chimpanzee, and the feet are long and curved. But this is a human, they're saying. So, did she walk upright? In order to determine that, you look at the rib cage, the pelvis, the leg, and foot bones. Ape ribs are conical shaped. You see how that's kind of a cone looking? Human ribs are barrel. They found that the ribs were more round, more like you see in apes. Human ribs are flatter. The shape of the rib cage itself was the big surprise of all. Human rib cage is barrel shaped. I just couldn't get Lucy's ribs to fit this kind of shape. I tried to get it to be a human, but it just didn't fit. That didn't take away their belief that it was human. In Lucy's case, her ribs are conical, like those found in apes. Guess what? All right, same thing with the pelvis. There's a chimp and human pelvis. And it tells you that it lies laterally in humans, but not in chimpanzees. The marked resemblance of Lucy to the chimpanzee is equally obvious. The mechanism of lateral pelvic balance during bipedalism was closer to that in apes than in humans. Her pelvis is wrong because it's ape-like, not human-like. So apparently they tried to fix her with a power saw. You know, if the bones don't fit your preconceptions, you cut the bones to make it fit your preconceptions. You think evolutionists are not above doing that? They do. I can tell you other stories too if you get a chance. I want to make sure we get through this. This is looking at the angle of the upper leg and lower leg for primates that walk. You can see that gorilla and chimp are 0, but humans are 9. But so are orangutans and spider monkeys. Now, how does it hinder? Well, here's the St. Louis Zoo replica of Lucy. You can see the feet there and there. Look like human feet. Which footprint's human? Left one, right? I mean, correct? Yeah. These footprints were discovered in Tanzania. Footprints dated at 3.5 million years old. And I don't know if you can see here, we'll get a close-up here in a minute, but those are made by humans. You can tell the difference. They're indistinguishable from those of habitually barefoot Homo sapiens. And the reason that's important is because that's way too old, they say, for humans to have existed. They had to be ape-like creatures, and yet they weren't. The big toe actually sticks out as in chimpanzees. So, is the big toe sticking out like a chimpanzee in this model? No. It looks like a human foot, just all hairy. This evolutionist admits that the statue's feet probably were not accurate. But when asked whether the statue should be changed, now if you're a scientist and you're promoting a model of something which is scientific, and someone points out that there's an error, what would you seek to do? You want it to be accurate, don't you, if you're a scientist? And so the feet are wrong. Should the statue be changed? Absolutely not. In other words, evolution must use bad science to deceive people because good science doesn't support them. In this textbook, it says 3.7 million years ago, several bipedal human animals of the species Australopithecus afarensis left footprints in damp volcanic ash in what is now Tanzania and East Africa. It's called human animals of that species. Did Lucy walk upright? Computer analysis, all these things indicate that it could not have walked upright. The hips, the pelvis, the legs, the feet are all wrong for something to walk upright. It lived in the trees. Lucy, known over the last several decades, now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. All this should make us wonder about the usual presentation of human evolution in introductory textbooks and museums. Here's our 10 unique characteristics. Let's just see what that. Textbooks and accuracy. Look at the difference between the teeth in the drawing and the teeth in the real thing. Look at the difference in the eye socket between the drawing and the real thing. Look at the flatter face in the drawing and the real thing. Is it possible for a Lucy-like creature to evolve into a human? Well, you have to have a beneficial mutation, which is near impossible. Mutations are not beneficial for the most part. Natural selection selects this mutation over other existing genes and other detrimental mutations, and then that mutation is inherited by the offspring. And this process must add new information. The information that's coded in each living thing is in their DNA. And a mutation would have to add information to the DNA that wasn't there before. And think about how many different creatures there are in the world. Millions of times, new information would have to be added to each creature in order for it to develop it as it has from its supposed ancestor. And that's just not possible. Natural selection is the ability to adapt to environment, survival of the fittest. Can natural selection cause one kind to become a new kind? The answer is no. Natural selection only works with existing information. So there is natural selection works with adaptation. That is, there is something within our genetic code that enables us to adapt, and every animal to adapt to a different environment. For some animals, it's their color changes, or in the finches, the beak changes, or whatever. But it can change back if the environment changes. Why? Not because they figured out, oh, I need to have a bigger beak. It's because God has put it in their DNA to be able to adapt to different environments. Natural selection can't add information. We look at different variations in humans. We got a 3'9" guy and a 7'1" guy. Are they different species? They're both human. There's just variation within the human race. Genetic variation and natural selection, not evolution. A mutation can either be detrimental, neutral, or beneficial. If it's detrimental, it leads to disease and there is no evolution. If it's neutral, then there is no change and there's no evolution. If it's by chance a beneficial mutation, which is a very small percentage, it would have to add information, which is impossible. There's no evolution. If it does add information, then that would change the shape of the animal, the makeup of the animal, but it wouldn't be passed on. You know, Darwin believed that in acquired characteristics being passed on, that if you grew an extra arm, for example, that you could pass that on to your children. Well, that doesn't happen. You know, those things aren't passed on. So evolution will only be possible if these changes could take place with added information, which is not possible. On all the reading I've done in the life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation in added information. That's from a secular scientist. Well, no, he's not a secular scientist. He's a creationist now. But you can see he has a PhD in physics, taught at Johns Hopkins University. He said all point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. So mutations reduce information, they don't increase information. And here's a list of scientists that work at Answers in Genesis to show you, because sometimes people say, well, true scientists believe in evolution. It's only those wacko Christians that don't. Well, here's a list of guys, and you can see their PhDs and MDs and so on. So, evolutionists ignore the scientific evidence. They mislead with pictures. They practice censorship. The evidence supports Lucy was a chimpanzee All the evidence supports created after their time, made in the image and likeness of God. All right, you are dismissed.